Hi YouTubers, and I'm back for another YouTube video of what would have happened if this were in real life RhinoTMRT gameplay series. Now, I tried over and over and over again, and it just felt, very obvious and all, and I kind of, didn't have any ideas, for a sequel, for what would have happened if this were in real life RhinoTMRT gameplay series YouTube video based on a sequel movie. Or first movie, or the first movie of which franchise, so I couldn't think of any. However, this one's fun. However, what would have happened if this were in real life RhinoTMRT gameplay series YouTube video is actually going to be based on a prequel movie, so yay. And then I'll explain, and then I guess, all that later, so yeah. So this is what would have happened if the Ohana family, the Lilo and Stitch prequel, were in real life. So we cut open to the beginning of two young kids, which these two young kids are actually Lilo and Nani's parents. Lilo and Nani's father, who's named Milo, and Lilo and Nani's mother, who of course is named Zanny. Zanny. Now, like I said before, this takes place long before the Lilo and Stitch 1 movie, which means there's no Stitch, the scientist who created him. You know what I mean, right? There's none of that in there. There's none sci-fi stuff in this Lilo and Stitch prequel, which is actually very, just to tell you. So yeah, so Zanny and Milo are obviously enjoying their lives, in which case I guess you can easily tell. So Milo's life. So first cuts open to Lilo and Nani's father's life, which of course he's a young kid. Who of course his father told him about how someday aliens might come down to their planet, which technically sets up the whole Stitch thing, because Lilo and Nani's father actually told him basically set up that one day that there would be aliens coming to Lilo and Nani's planet, along with their, so that kind of does set that up in a perfectly good way. And Milo actually is enjoying his perfectly good life. And much like Lilo, she's, kind of not popular and all with other boys, so she's kind of not. So technically, it's the idea of people saying, oh, it's the idea of people from that loved the Lilo and Stitch 1 movies thought, oh, well, Lilo not popular and all. Well, the same thing happens with her father, Milo. So, yeah, so Milo eventually enjoys his life, and then his grandfather, not his father, passes away, which of course changes everything. And then of course and much like Lilo, he actually did and much like Lilo, he actually did dance classes by his own, and much like them. But so back then there was like dance classes for men, which for in Lilo and Nani's world. But this takes place as a sequel, focusing on Lilo and Nani's mother and father. So this technically just goes back to that. So Milo is enjoying his life, and that is up until when he met. That is up until when he meets one of the great. That is until when Milo meets one of the greatest dancers in all of Hawaii, who just so happens to be named Zanny. So Zanny eventually comes across Milo, and after she won that prize, that prize that was mentioned, that Lilo's mother Zanny won. in Lilo, that was mentioned in Lilo and Stitch 2. So yeah, it kind of does take. It also takes that some of that element. It also takes that part and uses that again for the prequel. Uses that again for the prequel. So yeah, so Milo, who of course has no, who of course is no, who of course is no grandfather, who is, of course is no other old family members anymore, because now it's just him. Now it's just Milo and his father, who Milo's father would actually be, who Milo's father I couldn't come up with a name with actually has a real name, and it's basically called well, Milo's father doesn't have a real name, and well, yeah, I guess it kind of does make a lot of sense. And how, Lilo and Nani's father actually suffers from lots of problems, like money problems, which is something that came, which is an element from Lilo and Stitch 1. Like, remember when Nani couldn't afford a lot of money, or afford a job in like Lilo and Stitch 1. So yeah, it kind of does take that. So that same thing happened with Lilo's father, Milo. So yeah, that same thing happens with them. But then eventually Milo comes across his own version of Stitch, which comes across, his own, real life, version of himself, real life human version of Stitch, who just so happens to be like he has so Milo, aka Lilo's father, doesn't have a lot of popularity. That's up until when he meets someone who actually enjoys him. And yeah, I guess that kind of just makes sense. Then a few couple of years later, Milo and Zanny are and Milo's only friend from a little bit of popularity, which has no name technically, have all, grown up. They all enjoyed each other, and I guess that kind of does make a lot of sense. That is until when so here's how there's going to be a villain. So here's how the villain for the Ohana family is going to be. So I know who is it going to be. So it turns out that Milo, Lilo, and Nani's best friend's father's best friend is actually the main villain of the movie, who just wanted the attention from who just wanted to get all the attention away from who just wanted to get so much attention, and make it Milo lose all of his popularity. So Milo tells Zanny that his popularity that is popularity, and that nobody is recognizing him. Now, the reason why nobody is recognizing him or saying his name is because Milo's best friend actually betrayed him. So yeah, that kind of just makes sense. So he betrayed him, and then a few couple of years into his adult life, and then here we get to see a little bit of an older Nani and a younger Lilo. So we get to see that, and Milo and Zani, they both got married. It shows, and then we get some flashbacks of of Zanny and Milo getting married. All that stuff. Them getting a house. Yeah, I guess that kind of does make a lot of sense. That is until a few couple of years later, Milo's best friend that's until a few couple of years later, Milo's best friend had been betrayed by that person that person where Nani tried to, get, Milo's best friend was actually betrayed by that person, where he tells Nani that Lilo cannot be, that he's just doing his job, the guy that just trying to do his job to, see what's for the better of Lilo and Nani. That guy actually returns in this movie, and he says that Lilo, that he says to Milo's best friend that he is fired. And also, yeah, this of course makes him mad, and then of course he develops his own plan to get rid of Milo, and of course marry Zanny, and of course remarry with Zanny. So yeah, so that's kind of how the plot is going. So this is kind of how the plot is going for the prequel. So it's sort of like a jealousy. It's sort of like a movie where one person is trying to get the girl and the other person does, and then that one person, takes revenge on him for him having the girl and not be, him. So yeah, it's sort of that kind of movie. So yeah. So yeah, I guess so. And then Milo eventually appear, and then Milo and Milo's former best friend, they both have that is unnamed. They both have their own fight scene. They both have their own fighting battle scene, and it's not very short, but it's actually very long. So it's a little bit. It's not very short, but it is a little bit like long. So it's not like long, like super long. It's just a little bit long. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to do for this. Kind of what I wanted to do for this. And then just when things weren't gonna get worse for Milo and Zanny, Zanny's grandfather, of course, obviously dies, just like Milo's grandfather. Zanny's grandfather, of course, dies, which of course is actually very obvious. And there's kind of not a lot of people in this Lilo and Stitch prequel idea that I came up with, so I just kept it where it stands. And then of course Lilo's dad Milo eventually puts an end to he eventually puts an end to Milo's former best friend, and then he just falls to his death, kind of like that person from the Treasure Planet movie. Kind of like the person from the Treasure Planet movie, where he, of course, obviously didn't make it. So eventually, Milo and Zanny, they of course both celebrate, and they both go to the place where Nani eventually fired herself, quitted her job, and then they of course celebrate there. And then everything goes perfectly well. Even little Lilo and a little bit of an older Nani are both celebrating at this very moment, literally for no reason. And then everything else is perfectly fine. And then Milo says these words: "I know that there are aliens out there. My grandfather told me about it, and my father then. But I know that I will find a way to find them. And I know that one of my daughters is gonna find an alien and become best friends with it." And then it cuts to black, and then the end. And then the credits roll. And then we get a post credit scene where that scientist guy who made Stitch, he actually broke up with his girlfriend when he was an adult. So yeah, I guess that kind of does make a lot of sense. And then he creates Stitch, and that's how it's all born and all. So yeah. And that's what would have happened if the Ohana family movie, well, the Lilo and Stitch prequel movie, were in real life. Now, I mean, I couldn't come up with a much better idea for a Lilo and Stitch prequel movie idea. I mean, this is kind of all that I was going on. I mean, I kind of wanted to focus it more on like the humans and not on like the sci-fi stuff and all, which kind of does make perfectly good sense. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of it. So, yeah, anyways, that's it for today. Peace out. Bye bye.